actually, the store owner actually ends up making. Because we can mark up a price of an item, but notice the markup is just the selling price minus the actual cost of the item, and the actual cost of the item is what they pay the company who gives them the item. There are other costs to running a business. Those costs are called overhead. Okay, so overhead are things like, if in this example below, notice they have a subcontractor who puts those locks in for them. They have to give some of the amount to them. You have the cost of running your business. You have the cost of your employees. You have the cost of renting your space. You have the cost of electricity and power, electricity and water, and things like that. Okay, so net profit is how much you actually end up making, while the markup was just the amount they added to their cost from the manufacturer in order to set the selling price. So we, in these next examples, are going to be finding how much net profit they make, how much they actually make when they sell one of these items. So here we have an example with James Hardware. They sell door lock sets for $95, including installation. The company hires subcontractors to install the lock sets for $24 per lock. Other overhead costs are $4.52, and then we have their cost was $28.65. We want to know the net profit. You can use either find the markup and then use this formula to find your net profit, or you can just find the net profit by taking the selling price minus the costs and any overhead, which is what I think I will do. Okay, so the net profit is going to be the selling price, which was $95. And then we have to subtract any cost. The cost to them was $28.65. We also have to subtract any overhead. So the $24 that they pay to the subcontractor and the $4.52, which they didn't tell us what that was for. It's just other overhead costs. So that's how we're going to do this. We're going to take $95 minus $28.65 and minus 24. So we end up with $37.83. This question is a little bit different. We are still talking about our net profit. We are still talking about overhead costs, but we're finding different things in this example. Okay, notice this time they give us a percent of overhead. Sometimes companies will just determine that a certain percentage of their price is overhead. In this case, it's 65% of their selling price. And it says that would result for these people in an overhead cost of $84.23 on this air hockey table. The air hockey game costs them $42.40. We're asked to find the net profit. Well, we know the net profit is if we take the selling price and subtract the costs and the overhead from it. However, we at this point don't know what the selling price is. So we're going to find the selling price. And this is what we're going to use to find it. Now, to find overhead, they do the selling price times the overhead percent. So we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to write down what we have. We know our overhead is $84.23. That should equal whatever our selling price is times our percent, which was 65%, but remember we changed the decimal to the percent to a decimal before we calculate. Now we need to solve that. Okay, so again, when solving, you want to get the selling price by itself. Right now it's multiplied by 0.65, so we do the opposite and divide both sides by 0.65, and that should give us the selling price. When we do that, we get $129, and we round to the nearest cent, 58 cents. So they are selling the air hockey table for $129.58. We need to find the net profit. which means we take the selling price of $129.58 that we just found, subtract any markups, any overhead, so any costs and any overhead. Okay, so we know that their cost was $42.40. I'll replace this here, that can't be right. Okay, and subtract from that also the overhead, which they told us in the beginning was $84.23. And that will tell us what their net profit is when they sell a air hockey table. So they don't get a great profit off of this. They only make $2.95, and it's probably because their overhead is so high. That overhead percentage is that's a pretty big percent to pay. Okay, so they may want to consider raising the selling price since the profit they get off an air hockey table is $2.95. So again, on a question like this, we used the overhead and the overhead percent to find our selling price, and then we use that to find the net profit by doing the selling price minus the cost and minus the overhead. ABE Software creates customized software that sells for $3,625,765.10 total. Their cost is $1,435,000. And overhead expenses are estimated at 42% of the selling price. Okay, what is their net profit? Well, before we can find net profit, we have to know how much their overhead is. Okay, so remember the overhead is the selling price times the overhead percent. So let's do that. Let's find our overhead. We know the selling price is $3,625,765.10. We multiply that by the overhead rate, which was 42%. Again, change that percent to a decimal of 0.42. So we have $3,625,765.1 times 0.42. Okay, so their overhead is $522,821.34. That's their overhead costs. Okay, we need to find the net profit. Okay, remember our net profit, we take the selling price, which was again $3,625,765.10. We need to subtract the costs. The cost to them again was $1,435,000. And we need to subtract the overhead. So that 1 million, I'm just going to draw an arrow because I'm out of room here. The 1,522,821.34. We do that and we will have our net profit. So again, you start with what they sold it for. Subtract any costs. So again, the cost to them was the $1,435,000 and their overhead. Okay, so they had a pretty big net profit. Their net profit was $667,943.76.